The Azure Heights restaurant gleamed like a palace carved from moonlight and ambition. Vivian Sterling adjusted the platinum cuff on her wrist, the weight of her custom watch reminding her that time was currency, and she owned plenty of both. Her 6-year-old son Oliver walked beside her, his small hand gripping the fabric of her silk Valentino dress, with the quiet desperation of a child navigating a world to large and to loud. Vivian had built Sterling Biotech from a garage startup into a pharmaceutical empire worth $20 billion. She had conquered boardrooms filled with men twice her age, negotiated mergers that made headlines, and revolutionized cancer treatment protocols. Yet tonight, as she entered this cathedral of culinary excess, she felt strangely hollow. The reservation was strategic, a carefully planned appearance designed to soften her public image. A recent profile dubbed her the Ice Queen of biotechnology. Oliver tugged her dress. His voice barely rose above the ambient classical music filtering through invisible speakers. "Mom, there are too many people. Can we go home?" Vivian glanced down at her son, seeing the anxiety pooling in his grey eyes that mirrored her own. She had scheduled 17 meetings this week, closed a $400 million acquisition, and personally reviewed 300 pages of clinical trial data. Yet she could not remember the last time she had simply sat with Oliver and asked about his day without checking her phone. The host approached with practiced deference, his smile professional and meaningless. "Miss Sterling, your private booth awaits in the platinum section. Right this way, please." But Oliver had stopped walking entirely, his gaze fixed on something across the restaurant's main dining area, past the elaborate ice sculptures and towers of champagne glasses. Vivian followed his line of sight and discovered the object of his fascination. At a small table near the corner, almost hidden behind a decorative marble column, sat a man and a young girl. The man wore a flannel shirt with frayed cuffs, the kind of clothing Vivian associated with weekend farmers markets and thrift stores. His face carried the particular exhaustion of someone who worked too many hours for too little recognition. Yet he smiled broadly as he carefully cut pasta into perfect bite-sized pieces for the girl beside him. The girl was perhaps 7 years old, her hair pulled into uneven pigtails that suggested a father's well-meaning but inexperienced hand. She wore a purple dress that had clearly been washed so many times the color had faded to lavender, but her smile was incandescent, radiating a joy that seemed to fill the space around their modest table. Thomas Rivera had not planned to be in Azure Heights tonight. His original destination was a family diner 3 blocks away, the kind of place where coffee refills were unlimited and nobody judged your shoes. But when the diner's kitchen caught fire an hour earlier, he had desperately searched for an alternative. Ruby had earned straight excellence marks on her report card, and he had promised her a celebration dinner. When a confused hostess at Azure Heights accidentally seated them in a forgotten corner table, originally reserved for staff meals, Thomas said nothing. He recognized the mistake immediately, but could not bear the thought of being escorted out while Ruby stared at the beautiful chandeliers with such wonder. Ruby was his entire universe, the only light remaining. His wife Catherine had died 3 years earlier. Catherine, a brilliant surgeon, had collapsed during a routine procedure due to an undiagnosed heart condition. Thomas had been on shift at the hospital that night, just 2 floors below, coordinating emergency response teams. By the time he reached the operating room, she was gone. The guilt had consumed him entirely. He left his position as head of emergency medicine, unable to reconcile his ability to save strangers while failing to protect his own wife. Now he worked as a paramedic, a job that kept his medical skills sharp but maintained emotional distance. He also drove for a ride-share service on weekends. The combined income barely covered rent and Ruby's needs, but it was enough. It had to be enough. Ruby pointed at the chandelier above them, her voice filled with breathless excitement. "Papa, it looks like frozen starlight." Thomas grinned, his heart swelling with the pure, uncomplicated love only a parent truly understands. "That's because you see magic where others see glass, little bird." "Mom," Oliver whispered, his voice gaining unexpected strength. "I want to sit with them, please." Vivian blinked, completely taken off guard. Oliver never asked for anything spontaneously. His life was scheduled, managed, and supervised by a rotating team of nannies, tutors, and security personnel. Spontaneity had been efficiently eliminated from his existence, replaced with structure and safety. The host cleared his throat delicately, his professional mask showing the smallest crack of confusion. "Miss Sterling, your private booth offers significantly more privacy and comfort. That area is not suitable for guests of your standing." Vivian looked from the host to her son, then back to the table in the corner. She saw the stark contrast between her world and theirs. She saw the judgment that would inevitably follow if she, Vivian Sterling, sat with a man whose shirt probably cost less than her appetizer. But more importantly, she saw something else in her son's eyes. Hope. "My son decides where we sit," Vivian stated, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to obedience. She walked directly toward the corner table, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of a declaration. Thomas looked up from Ruby's pasta and nearly knocked over his water glass. The woman approaching his table was impossible to mistake. Vivian Sterling graced the cover of Forbes, Bloomberg, and every major business publication. Her face represented success, power, and an untouchable level of achievement, and she was walking directly toward him. Ruby, unburdened by social hierarchies or wealth consciousness, noticed Vivian's dress and immediately smiled. "Your dress is so pretty, like a princess." Vivian stopped at the table's edge, her rehearsed social scripts momentarily failing her. Oliver peeked out from behind her dress, his eyes fixed on Ruby with the intensity of someone discovering a new continent. "My son would like to join your table," Vivian said, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. She never asked permission. She issued directives, made demands, and expected compliance. "May we sit with you?" Thomas stood automatically, his paramedic training making him instinctively assess the situation. The woman before him radiated tension, despite her controlled exterior. He noticed the slight tremor in her perfectly manicured hands, the tightness around her eyes, the defensive set of her shoulders. She was under immense pressure, though she wore it like armor. "Of course," Thomas replied, quickly pulling out the remaining chairs at the small table. "We would be honored." Ruby clapped her hands together with delight. "Yes. Now we have more friends, Papa. Can the boy sit next to me?" Oliver moved without waiting for his mother's permission, settling into the chair beside Ruby with a small, genuine smile that Vivian had not seen in months. The two children began talking immediately, their conversation flowing with the effortless ease of youth unburdened by status or expectation. Vivian sat down carefully, acutely aware of the eyes turning in their direction. Whispers began circulating through the restaurant like ripples in disturbed water. She could imagine the headlines, the speculation, the inevitable social media commentary. Yet for the first time in years, she discovered she did not immediately care. Thomas watched as Vivian settled into the chair, noticing how she held herself with military precision, as though relaxation itself was a vulnerability she could not afford. He recognized the symptoms of chronic stress, the physical manifestation of a life lived entirely in fight or flight mode. Ruby, oblivious to the adult tension, launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her school project about butterflies. Oliver listened with rapt attention, asking questions and laughing at Ruby's animated descriptions. The sound of his laughter startled Vivian, reminding her that childhood joy still existed within her serious, anxious little boy. A waiter approached, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes betraying disdain as he took in Thomas's worn clothing and Ruby's faded dress. "Are we ready to order?" he asked, his tone suggesting they were anything but ready. Thomas quickly scanned the menu, his stomach tightening as he calculated prices. Everything cost more than his daily earnings. He spotted the pasta Ruby was already eating, the cheapest item, and prepared to order another serving for Oliver. "He'll have the children's pasta," Thomas said quickly, trying to sound confident despite his discomfort. The waiter's lip curled almost imperceptibly. "That particular dish is $45. Are you certain this table can accommodate such selections?" The question hung in the air, heavy with judgment and barely concealed contempt. Ruby's smile faltered slightly, her young mind beginning to understand that something was wrong. Thomas felt heat rising in his chest, the familiar shame of economic inadequacy hanging around him like chains. Before Thomas could respond, Vivian's voice cut through the tension, a surgical blade, cold and absolute in its authority. Bring 2 of the children's pasta dishes immediately and charge everything to my corporate platinum account. And bring your manager, now. The waiter's face drained of color as recognition dawned. He stammered an apology and fled toward the kitchen. His professional composure shattered entirely. Oliver reached across the table, his small hand touching Ruby's arm with gentle reassurance. Don't be sad. My mom fixes everything. Ruby brightened immediately, her resilient spirit bouncing back. My papa fixes everything too. He saved a whole family last week when their car crashed. He's a real superhero. Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion, humbled by his daughter's unwavering faith in him, despite their struggles. Vivian found herself staring at Thomas with newfound curiosity, seeing past his worn clothing to the capable hands, the intelligent eyes, and the unmistakable competence lurking beneath his humble exterior. A woman from a nearby table, dripping with jewels and superiority, leaned toward her companion and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. How absolutely bizarre. Vivian Sterling dining with charity cases. Is this some sort of publicity stunt for her shareholders? The words struck like physical blows, designed to humiliate and diminish. Thomas lowered his eyes, his jaw clenching with restrained anger and resigned acceptance. He had heard variations of this dismissal his entire adult life. But Ruby stood up on her chair, her small frame vibrating with protective fury. My papa is better than all of you. He helps people every single day. You're just mean. Oliver immediately stood as well, his voice soft but determined. Mr. Thomas is nicer than anyone I know. He smiles real smiles, not fake ones. Vivian watched her son defend a stranger with more passion than she had ever seen him display, and something fundamental shifted inside her carefully constructed walls. These children, innocent and unfiltered, saw truth that adults spent lifetimes avoiding. They recognized genuine value regardless of economic packaging. The moment crystallized into something profound when Vivian's phone erupted with urgent notifications. She glanced at the screen, her face going pale as she read the message from her executive assistant. Emergency board meeting. Hostile takeover attempt. Evidence of mental instability. They were coming for her company, her legacy, her identity. Her hand began trembling uncontrollably, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. The stress she had been carrying for months finally breached her defenses, manifesting as a physiological crisis. The restaurant tilted slightly, edges of her vision darkening. Thomas saw the signs instantly, his dormant medical training snapping into focus. Without hesitation, he grabbed the water glass and sugar packets from an abandoned coffee service, moving with the precision of someone who made life or death decisions under pressure. Drink this now, he commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority as he mixed sugar into the water and placed it in Vivian's shaking hands. You're experiencing acute stress-induced hypoglycemia. Your blood sugar has crashed. Drink slowly and breathe with me. In 4-4 counts, hold 4-4, out 4-4. Vivian obeyed automatically, something about his voice bypassing her usual resistance to being told what to do. The sweet water steadied her, the breathing technique pulling her back from the edge of collapse. Within minutes, color returned to her face and the trembling subsided. Oliver clung to his mother's arm, tears streaming down his face. Mom, please don't get sick. Please don't leave me. Thomas knelt beside the terrified boy, placing a steady hand on his small shoulder. Your mom is okay, buddy. She just needed help. And that's what we do. We help people we care about. Vivian looked at Thomas through tear-blurred eyes, seeing him clearly for the first time, not as a poor man in a cheap shirt, but as a professional who had just saved her from public catastrophe with skill, speed, and selfless compassion. Why did you help me? She whispered, her voice raw with vulnerability. You owe me nothing. My world dismissed you the moment we walked in. Thomas met her gaze, his expression open and honest. Because your son needs his mother conscious and present. No child, regardless of wealth or status, should watch their parent collapse. That's non-negotiable. In that single moment, surrounded by judgment and whispers, Vivian Sterling discovered something her billions had never purchased: unconditional human decency from someone who had every reason to walk away. Vivian's assistant burst through the restaurant entrance, her expression frantic and her designer heels clicking rapidly against the marble floor. She navigated through the maze of tables with desperate urgency, her phone pressed against her ear as she spoke in rapid, panicked sentences. "Miss Sterling, we have a catastrophic situation," the assistant announced breathlessly, oblivious to the intimate moment she was interrupting. "The board has convened an emergency session. Someone leaked internal medical records suggesting you're unfit for leadership. They're invoking the mental competency clause in your contract. The video of your collapse here, already trending on social media with over 2 million views. They're calling it a breakdown." The words hit Vivian like a physical assault. Her carefully constructed empire, built through 15 years of relentless dedication, was being dismantled in real time by enemies who had waited patiently for a single moment of human weakness. The irony was devastating. Her moment of vulnerability, the very thing that made her human, was being weaponized to prove her inadequacy. Thomas immediately recognized the strategic pattern. His years in emergency medicine had taught him to identify crisis situations that extended beyond physical symptoms. This was a coordinated attack, timed precisely to maximize damage and minimize defense opportunities. "May I see your phone?" Thomas asked Vivian, his tone professional but urgent. Vivian handed him the device without hesitation, surprising herself with the automatic trust she placed in this stranger. Thomas scrolled through the notifications, his eyes scanning rapidly, his mind processing information with the analytical precision of someone trained to make critical decisions under extreme pressure. "This leak happened 14 minutes after your stress episode," Thomas observed, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "The video was uploaded from an account created today, specifically for this purpose. Your assistant received a notification exactly 3 minutes after the upload went viral. The timing is too precise to be coincidental. Someone inside your organization orchestrated this entire scenario." Vivian's executive assistant shifted uncomfortably, her face reddening slightly. Thomas noticed the tell immediately, recognizing the micro-expression of guilt that preceded confession. "How long have you been feeding information to Gerald Hutchinson?" Thomas asked directly, his gaze fixed on the assistant with unwavering intensity. The assistant's composure shattered completely. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm loyal to Miss Sterling." Thomas pulled up the phone's metadata and displayed the upload information. "The video was filmed from your personal device and uploaded through a VPN, registered to a company owned by Hutchinson Financial Group. Gerald Hutchinson has been attempting to acquire Sterling Biotech for 3 years. You were hired 8 months ago, immediately after his last failed acquisition attempt. You're not an assistant. You're an embedded operative." The restaurant had gone completely silent. Every patron watched the drama unfold with rapt attention. The assistant's face cycled through denial, anger, and finally resignation as her cover disintegrated under Thomas's methodical deconstruction. "He promised me equity," the assistant whispered, her voice hollow with the realization of her own expendability. "He said Vivian was destroying the company with her obsessive control. He said I was helping save jobs." Vivian felt rage and betrayal warring inside her chest, but Thomas placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but grounding. "Don't engage with her," he advised quietly. "She's a symptom, not the disease. Gerald Hutchinson is your real opponent, and he's counting on you reacting emotionally right now. That emotional reaction will become tomorrow's headline." Further proof of instability. Oliver clutched his mother's hand tightly, his young face reflecting confusion and fear. Ruby moved closer to him, instinctively offering the comfort she had learned to provide when her father faced difficult moments. "We need to leave now," Vivian said, her voice regaining its characteristic command. "I need to prepare a defense, contact my legal team, and manage this crisis before the board meeting tomorrow." Thomas shook his head firmly. "The worst thing you can do right now is appear defensive or hide. That validates their narrative. Instead, you need to reframe this entire situation from weakness into strength. You need to own the vulnerability and transform it into evidence of your humanity, not your inadequacy." Vivian stared at Thomas with a mixture of desperation and hope. How do I turn a viral video of me collapsing into a strength? "By telling the truth," Thomas replied simply. "You're not a machine. You're a mother, an CEO, who pushed herself to exhaustion while fighting a hostile takeover attempt designed to destroy everything you built. The people attempting to remove you, banking on public perception that successful women must be invulnerable. Show them that real strength includes knowing when to accept help." The restaurant manager appeared, profusely apologetic and clearly terrified of the potential publicity disaster unfolding in his establishment. "Miss Sterling, please allow us to move you to our private dining room. We can ensure complete privacy and security." Vivian looked at Thomas, then at the children, then back at the watching crowd. She made a decision that defied every instinct her corporate training had instilled. "No," Vivian declared, her voice carrying through the restaurant with absolute clarity. "I'm not hiding. We're going to finish our meal together, as a family. Let them watch. Let them see that I choose connection over isolation." The boldness of the statement rippled through the room. Several patrons nodded with unexpected respect, while others whispered with increased intensity. But Vivian no longer cared about their judgment. For the first time in her adult life, she prioritized her son's needs over her public image. They resumed their meal, though the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. Thomas ordered food for himself and Ruby, insisting on paying his portion, despite Vivian's protests. The act was symbolic, a quiet assertion of his dignity and independence. As they ate, Thomas began asking Vivian strategic questions about her company, her board composition, and the specific legal mechanisms they might employ. His questions revealed a sophisticated understanding of corporate structure and human psychology that surprised Vivian deeply. "You're not just a paramedic," Vivian observed, watching him sketch organizational charts on a napkin with practiced efficiency. "Your analytical approach is too refined, too systematic. You have advanced training." Thomas paused, his expression clouding with old pain. Ruby reached over and squeezed his hand, offering silent encouragement. He took a deep breath and made a decision to share the truth he had buried for 3 years. "I was the head of emergency medicine at Metropolitan General Hospital," Thomas admitted, his voice heavy with the weight of his past. "I specialized in trauma response and crisis intervention. I also consulted on high-stress, organizational management for hospital administration. I understood how systems broke down under pressure and how to rebuild them." Vivian listened intently, pieces of the puzzle assembling into a coherent picture. "What happened? Why did you leave?" "My wife Catherine died during a routine surgical procedure," Thomas explained, his words measured and controlled, despite the emotion beneath them. "She had an undiagnosed cardiac condition that caused sudden failure. I was in the same hospital, 2 floors below, coordinating an emergency response team for a multi-vehicle accident. By the time I reached the operating room, she was gone." Oliver and Ruby had stopped eating, both children sensing the profound sadness in Thomas's confession. Ruby leaned against her father, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "The guilt destroyed me," Thomas continued. "I had spent my entire career saving strangers, and I couldn't save the one person who mattered most. I blamed my dedication to the job, my constant availability to everyone except my own family. So I left. I walked away from medicine because I couldn't reconcile being good at saving lives while failing to protect Catherine." Vivian felt tears forming in her eyes. Recognizing the self-imposed exile Thomas had embraced as penance. "But you just saved me," she whispered. "You didn't hesitate. Your instincts took over immediately." Thomas nodded slowly. "Because your son was watching, I saw the terror in Oliver's eyes, and I couldn't let another child experience the trauma of watching their parents slip away when intervention was possible. In that moment, my guilt became irrelevant. Your son's need was absolute." The vulnerability of the confession created an unexpected intimacy among the four people at the small table. They were no longer strangers separated by economic circumstances. They were four individuals connected by shared trauma, protective love, and the courage to be authentically broken in front of each other. Vivian reached across the table and placed her hand over Thomas's. "Come to my home tonight," she invited, her voice soft but sincere. "Not as a business strategy or a media opportunity. Come because our children have found something rare and precious in each other, and because I want to know the man who saw past my armor to the frightened mother underneath." Thomas looked at Ruby, who was nodding enthusiastically, her eyes bright with hope. He looked at Oliver, who gripped his mother's hand while smiling at Ruby with genuine affection. He saw the possibility of healing, not just for himself, but for all of them. "Okay," Thomas agreed. "We'll come." They left the restaurant together, walking past the whispering patrons and the flashing cameras that had materialized outside. Vivian held Oliver's hand while Thomas carried Ruby on his shoulders. To observers, they appeared to be an unlikely alliance, but to each other, they were becoming something far more significant, a chosen family built on mutual respect and shared vulnerability. Vivian's mansion stood like a modern fortress, all glass and steel, an architectural ambition. Thomas felt completely out of place as they entered the vast foyer, his modest clothing and worn shoes contrasting sharply with the museum-quality art and Italian marble floors. "This is bigger than our entire apartment building," Ruby whispered in awe, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Oliver took Ruby's hand immediately. "Want to see my playroom? I have toys we can play with, lots of them." The children disappeared up the curved staircase, their laughter floating back down like music the house had never heard before. Vivian and Thomas stood in the uncomfortable silence of two adults suddenly alone after an emotionally exhausting evening. "I don't know how to do this," Vivian admitted, gesturing vaguely at the opulent surroundings. "I don't know how to be casual or relaxed in my own home. This house is beautiful, but it's never felt warm. It's a showcase, not a sanctuary." Thomas walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. "Houses become homes when they witness authentic life," he observed. "Right now, your children are upstairs creating memories. That's the beginning of warmth." Vivian joined him at the window, standing close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "The board meeting is tomorrow at 9. Gerald Hutchinson will present the video, medical speculation, and character witnesses claiming I'm unstable. My legal team is preparing a defense, but I'm fighting with one hand tied behind my back. Every aggressive move I make will be used as evidence of emotional volatility." Thomas turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "Then don't fight aggressively. Fight strategically. Hutchinson expects the Ice Queen. Give him the opposite. Walk into that meeting with me and the children. Demonstrate that your moment of weakness was actually a moment of connection, something Hutchinson fundamentally cannot understand because he's never prioritized relationships over acquisitions. You want to come to the board meeting?" Vivian asked, surprise evident in her voice. "I want to help you," Thomas corrected, "not as a paramedic or a former doctor, but as someone who understands that your greatest strength isn't your ruthlessness. It's your capacity for growth and change. Show the board that you're not breaking down, but breaking through to a more balanced, sustainable leadership model." Vivian felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with being truly seen by another person. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me. You have every reason to resent the world I represent." Thomas smiled, the expression transforming his tired face into something genuinely beautiful. "Because Ruby deserves to see her father stand up for what's right, regardless of personal cost. And because Oliver deserves to see his mother receive the same unconditional support she's learning to give. Our children are watching us, Vivian. Let's show them something worth remembering. Upstairs, Oliver and Ruby had constructed an elaborate blanket fort in the center of his enormous playroom, surrounded by hundreds of expensive toys that had never been opened. They sat inside their fabric castle, talking with the easy intimacy of old friends. "Your mom is really pretty," Ruby said, arranging plastic dinosaurs in careful rows. "But she seems really sad sometimes." Oliver nodded seriously. "She works all the time. She says it's important, but I think she's lonely." "I'm lonely too, even with all the nannies and tutors. They're nice, but they're not family." Ruby considered this carefully. "My papa is lonely too. He misses my mama. He doesn't say it, but I know because sometimes he cries in the shower when he thinks I'm asleep. I wish he had someone to hug him. Maybe our parents can be friends," Oliver suggested hopefully. "Then we could be friends too, like brother and sister." "I always wanted a sister." Ruby's face lit up with joy. "Me too. I mean, I wanted a brother or sister. We could have sleepovers and share secrets and protect each other from bad dreams." The children made a pact in their blanket fort, a solemn childhood promise to help their lonely parents find the happiness they deserved. Downstairs, the adults they were plotting for stood together at the window, unaware that their children had already decided their futures. Vivian led Thomas to the kitchen, where she awkwardly attempted to make tea, clearly unfamiliar with her own appliances. Thomas gently took over, finding the kettle and preparing the drink with efficient grace. "I delegate everything," Vivian confessed, watching him work. "I have a staff of 12 managing this house, and I couldn't tell you where the coffee is stored. I've optimized my life so thoroughly that I've eliminated all the small human moments that make life meaningful." Thomas handed her a steaming cup, their fingers brushing briefly. "It's not too late to reclaim those moments. You just need to decide that connection matters more than efficiency." They talked until midnight, sharing stories about their children, their fears, and their carefully hidden dreams. Vivian admitted she had no friends, only business associates and strategic relationships. Thomas shared his struggle with survivor's guilt and his fear that he had failed Catherine by not being present enough. As Thomas prepared to leave, Oliver and Ruby appeared at the top of the stairs, both children looking sleepy, but content. "Can Ruby stay here tonight?" Oliver asked, his voice hopeful. "We made a fort, and we want to have a sleepover." Vivian looked at Thomas, who shrugged with amused resignation. "If it's okay with you, I suppose one night won't hurt, though I'll need to bring her school clothes tomorrow." "Stay," Vivian offered impulsively. "Both of you. We have 7 guest rooms. Stay tonight. Help me prepare for tomorrow's meeting, and let the children enjoy their first sleepover together." Thomas hesitated, aware of the implications and the growing connection he felt toward this complicated, brilliant woman. But Ruby's hopeful expression and Oliver's genuine smile made the decision simple. "Okay," Thomas agreed. "We'll stay." That night, as Thomas lay in a guest room larger than his entire apartment, he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Vivian appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, looking vulnerable and uncertain. "I can't sleep," she admitted. "I keep thinking about tomorrow and everything I could lose." Thomas sat up, making room for her to sit on the edge of the bed. "You won't face it alone. That's the difference between tonight and every other crisis you've navigated. This time, you have someone who sees beyond the CEO to the person underneath." Vivian felt tears streaming down her face, years of repressed emotion finally breaking through her carefully maintained control. Thomas held her while she cried, offering no judgment or advice, simply presence and acceptance. When her tears finally subsided, Vivian looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes and whispered, "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to need someone. I've spent my entire adult life being self-sufficient." "Start by admitting you're human," Thomas suggested gently. "Start by letting yourself be imperfect and asking for help. Start by believing that your value isn't determined by your productivity or your profits. You're valuable because you're Oliver's mother, Because you care about doing the right thing, and because you're brave enough to be vulnerable despite everything your world taught you. In that quiet moment, with the city lights filtering through expensive curtains and to children sleeping peacefully down the hall, Vivian Sterling began the difficult work of dismantling her armor and discovering the woman she had buried beneath decades of corporate ambition. The Sterling Biotech boardroom occupied the entire 42nd floor of a downtown skyscraper, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city Vivian had conquered through sheer determination and intellectual brilliance. The conference table stretched 20 feet, surrounded by leather chairs, occupied by 15 board members, whose collective wealth exceeded several small nations' gross domestic product. Gerald Hutchinson sat at the far end, his silver hair perfectly styled, his custom suit probably costing more than Thomas earned in 6 months. He exuded the confidence of a predator who had finally cornered his prey after years of patient stalking. Vivian entered the boardroom at exactly 9 o'clock, but she did not enter alone. Thomas walked beside her, wearing a borrowed suit that belonged to Vivian's late father, somehow making the dated clothing look dignified through sheer presence. Behind them walked Oliver and Ruby, both children holding hands, dressed in their school clothes. Their presence an unexpected disruption to the formal corporate proceeding. The board members exchanged confused glances. Several whispered urgently to their assistants. Gerald Hutchinson's carefully constructed expression faltered momentarily before recovering. "Miss Sterling," Gerald began, his voice dripping with false concern. "While we appreciate your arrival, this is a closed board session regarding serious allegations of mental incompetence. Children and unauthorized personnel cannot attend." Vivian walked to her designated seat at the head of the table, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Mr. Hutchinson, you called this emergency meeting based on a viral video depicting my personal health crisis. That crisis occurred in front of my son and was resolved through the intervention of Dr. Thomas Rivera, a former head of emergency medicine with specialized training in trauma response and organizational psychology. His presence is directly relevant to the proceedings. The children are here because this discussion directly impacts their futures." Gerald's jaw tightened, but he gestured for the meeting to proceed. A junior board member activated the presentation screen, displaying the viral video, humiliating detail. Vivian watched herself trembling, nearly collapsing, being stabilized by Thomas's quick intervention. "This video has been viewed over 15 million times in 18 hours, Gerald announced, his tone suggesting grave concern, while his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "It depicts our CEO experiencing what appears to be a complete mental and physical breakdown in a public setting, combined with medical records suggesting chronic stress disorders and statements from staff regarding erratic behavior. We have substantial grounds to invoke the mental competency clause in Miss Sterling's contract. Those medical records were illegally obtained and selectively edited," Vivian countered, her voice steady, despite the fury building in her chest. "And the staff statements come from a single source, my former assistant, who has been exposed as an embedded operative working directly for you, Mr. Hutchinson." Gerald smiled coldly. "Paranoid accusations without evidence. Classic signs of stress-induced delusions." Thomas stood, his movement drawing every eye in the room. He connected his phone to the presentation system, displaying a detailed timeline of digital communications, financial transfers, and metadata analysis. "This is the evidence," Thomas stated, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone presenting medical findings to skeptical colleagues. 8 months ago, Gerald Hutchinson established a shell company called Meridian Consulting. That company hired Jennifer Walsh, who was subsequently placed as Miss Sterling's executive assistant through a recruitment firm that Meridian Consulting owns. Over the past 8 months, Jennifer received monthly payments of $50,000 from Meridian, payments that ceased exactly 1 week ago when she successfully delivered the viral video. Thomas advanced the presentation, showing encrypted communication logs he had extracted from the assistant's phone after she abandoned it at the restaurant in her panicked flight. Jennifer was instructed to document any moment of weakness or vulnerability. When no such moments occurred naturally, Mr. Hutchinson escalated his strategy. He initiated the hostile takeover rumors, specifically to create psychological pressure on Miss Sterling. The timing of yesterday's emergency notification was not coincidental. It was delivered precisely when Miss Sterling was in a public setting with media presence, maximizing the potential for public documentation of her stress response. The board members leaned forward, their skepticism transforming into genuine interest. Gerald's face had gone pale, his carefully constructed narrative collapsing under Thomas's methodical deconstruction. This entire coup was orchestrated to manufacture evidence of incompetence where none existed. Thomas continued. Mr. Hutchinson needed Miss Sterling to fail publicly because he could not defeat her professionally. When competition failed, he resorted to character assassination. A senior board member, Margaret Chen, spoke up. Dr. Rivera, these are serious allegations. Do you have verification of this analysis? Thomas displayed financial records showing payment trails, communication timestamps, and the metadata proving the video was uploaded from Jennifer's device through a VPN registered to Hutchinson's network. I spent 3 years investigating medical malpractice cases and organizational corruption at Metropolitan General, Thomas explained. I know how to identify coordinated attacks disguised as individual failures. This pattern is textbook corporate sabotage. Gerald stood abruptly, his composure finally shattering. This is absurd. You're listening to a paramedic who drives for ride-sharing services over a board member who has invested hundreds of millions in this company. I'm listening to a doctor who recognized a crisis and intervened with skill and integrity. Margaret corrected sharply. Something you conspicuously failed to do. Mr. Hutchinson. Oliver suddenly stood on his chair, his small voice cutting through the tension. Mr. Thomas saved my mom. He didn't have to, but he did. He's a good person. You're all being mean to my mom because she worked hard to make your company better. Ruby stood beside him on her own chair. My papa helps people every single day. He's a real superhero. Your fancy clothes don't make you better than him. The unexpected intervention from the children created a moment of profound discomfort among the board members. Several looked genuinely ashamed, confronted with the simple moral clarity that children possessed before corruption taught them to compromise integrity for profit. Vivian felt her throat tighten with emotion. Her son, who rarely spoke in public, was defending her with fierce, uncompromising loyalty. Thomas's daughter, who owed Vivian nothing, stood beside Oliver in solidarity. Margaret Chen stood, her expression resolute. I moved to dismiss all charges against Miss Sterling and to open an investigation into Gerald Hutchinson's conduct. Furthermore, I recommend we consider Dr. Rivera's analysis as the basis for potential legal action against Mr. Hutchinson for corporate espionage and attempted fraud. The vote was swift and unanimous, with only Gerald Hutchinson abstaining. Security was called to escort him from the building. As he passed Vivian's chair, he leaned close and whispered venomously, "You may have won today, but you're still broken. Everyone saw you collapse. That image will follow you forever." Vivian met his gaze without flinching. The difference between us, Gerald, is that I have the courage to be human in public. You hide your weakness behind ruthlessness and call it strength. I'd rather be broken and genuine than pristine and hollow. Gerald left in disgrace, his reputation and career effectively ended. The board members approached Vivian individually, offering apologies and renewed confidence in her leadership. But Margaret Chen approached Thomas specifically. Dr. Rivera, your analytical skills and crisis management abilities are exceptional, Margaret said. Sterling Biotech would benefit enormously from your expertise. Would you consider joining our team as Chief Wellness Officer and Strategic Advisor? Your role would involve organizational health assessment, crisis intervention protocol development, and ensuring our leadership maintains sustainable work-life balance. Thomas looked at Ruby, who was whispering excitedly with Oliver about the possibility of seeing each other every day. He looked at Vivian, whose eyes reflected hope and something deeper. something that made his heart race with possibilities he had thought died with Catherine. "I have conditions," Thomas stated firmly. "My primary responsibility remains my daughter. I will not accept a position that requires me to sacrifice presence for prestige. I need flexible hours, remote work capability, and the explicit understanding that Ruby's needs supersede corporate demands. Additionally, I want to establish a foundation within Sterling Biotech that provides emergency financial assistance and mental health support for single parents in crisis." Margaret glanced at Vivian, who nodded immediately. "Done," Margaret agreed. "Draft your ideal contract, and we'll accommodate every reasonable request. Your integrity and priorities are exactly what this organization needs." Thomas extended his hand, sealing the agreement. As the board members filed out, Vivian, Thomas, and the children remained in the empty boardroom, the city sprawling beneath them like a conquered kingdom. "What happens now?" Vivian asked quietly, the question carrying weight beyond professional implications. Thomas took her hand, his touch sending warmth through her entire body. "Now we figure out how to build a life together, not as CEO and employee, not as the billionaire and the single dad, but as the people who discovered that vulnerability is the foundation of genuine connection." Oliver and Ruby ran to their parents, forming a spontaneous group embrace. The four of them stood together in the boardroom, an unconventional family built from crisis, courage, and the radical decision to prioritize love over everything else. 6 months later, Vivian stood in the modest backyard of a house she had purchased in a middle-class neighborhood, watching Thomas teach Oliver and Ruby how to plant a vegetable garden. She had sold the mansion, donating the proceeds to establish the Catherine Rivera Foundation for single-parent support. Named in honor of Thomas's late wife, the new house was a fraction of the size of her former residence, but it felt more like home than anywhere she had ever lived. She had restructured her role at Sterling Biotech, hiring a co-CEO to share operational responsibilities and implementing company-wide policies that prioritized employee well-being over maximum profit extraction. Thomas joined her on the porch, his hands dirty from gardening, his smile genuine and unguarded. "Ruby asked me this morning if we're a forever family now. She wanted to know if you and Oliver are permanent." Vivian felt tears forming, the good kind that signified joy rather than pain. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that families aren't defined by legal documents or traditional structures. They're defined by commitment and choice. I told her that I choose you and Oliver every single day, and I hope you choose us too." Vivian kissed him, tasting dirt and sunscreen, and the simple sweetness of a life built on authenticity rather than ambition. "I choose you, every single day, forever." Oliver and Ruby ran toward them, covered in mud and laughing with unrestrained joy. They crashed into their parents, creating a muddy, chaotic, absolutely perfect family embrace. That evening, as the four of them sat around a modest dinner table eating pasta that Thomas had cooked, Oliver made an announcement. "Ruby and I decided we want to be officially family. Can we make it real?" Vivian and Thomas exchanged meaningful glances, understanding the question beneath the question. A month later, they stood in a small garden ceremony, exchanging vows witnessed by Margaret Chen, a few close colleagues, and most importantly, to children who had orchestrated the entire romance from their blanket fort months earlier. The story that had begun with judgment and crisis ended with belonging and purpose. Vivian learned that true wealth was measured in shared meals, children's laughter, and the privilege of being loved for who you were rather than what you controlled. Thomas discovered that healing from loss did not require abandoning his gifts, but redirecting them towards sustainable service rather than self-destructive penance. And Oliver and Ruby, the true architects of their family's transformation, gained the siblings they had always wanted and the security of knowing their parents would never again be alone. In a world obsessed with power, perfection, and pretense, for people built something revolutionary, an authentic life where vulnerability was celebrated, connection was prioritized, and love was chosen deliberately every single day. The billionaire who had everything discovered that she had nothing until she found the courage to need someone. The single dad who had lost everything discovered that his greatest gift was his capacity to see the humanity others overlooked. And together, they proved that the most valuable treasures cannot be bought, only built through the patient, courageous work of showing up honestly for the people you love. Their story became legend within Sterling Biotech, inspiring a cultural revolution that prioritized human wellness alongside profit margins. Other companies began adopting their model, recognizing that sustainable success required leaders who were whole people rather than efficient machines. But the real victory happened in the small, private moments. In weekend pancake breakfasts, where everyone helped cook. In family game nights, where laughter mattered more than winning. In bedtime stories, where both parents took turns. In the quiet assurance that no matter what challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them together. Vivian Sterling had conquered the corporate world, but her greatest achievement was building a family from 4 broken pieces that somehow fit together perfectly. Thomas Rivera had walked away from medicine to protect his daughter, but in saving Vivian, he saved himself and discovered that healing others was not incompatible with being present for the people you loved. And as the sun set on their new life, painting the modest backyard in shades of gold and amber, Oliver and Ruby played while their parents watched, hand in hand, grateful for the mysterious night as a fancy restaurant when a single dad had turned a billionaire's carefully constructed world into something far more valuable. A home filled with authentic love and unconditional belonging. The end was actually a beginning, proving that sometimes the best stories start with a collapse and end with the courage to stand together. Imperfect and human, and absolutely enough.